Hi everybody. Let's just get the camera sorted so you can see what I'm doing. And I need to turn the mail program off so that's not binging at us. Let's just bring that on silent as well, and I need to find our picture for today. So let's go onto there. I think we can either have my head or the table. I think the table's more important, so we'll go for seeing the table of to what's going on. And as you can see, the sun is shining. Unlike the picture that I put as the header on here, it's went, oh, it's not actually chucking it down and really grey and horrible. It's a beautiful day. So it's nice to have a bit of, until I've started filming, I've had the door open, just kind of going, oh, there's a bit of daylight coming in and a bit of fresh air. And after a winter of, well, the past month, it's just been really, really wet and miserable. So no matter how much I ran the dehumidifier, nothing was feeling like it was properly drying out. So I'll just give it one more minute until we properly get to past, because that's when I said that we would start. If anybody's got any questions at any point, you can type them in the chat bit and I'll try and remember to look at it and answer them as we go along. But generally how this works, it's less of a, this is exactly what I do in order to dye, and more of a, I sort of talk you through what's going on in my head as I'm thinking about how to create these seasonal changes colorways, in terms of just how I mix up colors. And let's find the notebook and the pen and paper, because of course these ones are repeatable for a whole month. So once this first pack sells out, I'll then re-dye some more and get them online. So I do need to know what I've used. And my giant book is actually pretty much full. So I'm going to have to find another one. I've got one more space that I can squeeze in today's. So we shall make a start because it is now past. It was really close picking the colours this time. We ended up with all 3 different colourways with really comparable votes. In the end, Hoarfrost got one more vote than Frosted Feast. Despite my best efforts to try and force this one through, but force Frosted Feast in by putting it in for a second month to see if anybody would choose it that time. But it's lost out by one vote to Hoarfrost, which is going to be, Hoarfrost is an unusual colour palette. It's the one that's got all the muted neutrals in. So it's going to be interesting to dye. I'm not entirely certain how close I'm going to get to some of the colours. We shall see. And I think it'll be a nice contrast to lots of the other ones we've had recently, because there's nothing that's very, very definitely sort of what we would call colours. I mean, neutrals are colours, but this is all shades of basically brown. Okay, so we're going to go for Hoarfrost. Let me write that down so I know which one we've dyed. Right, when I come to dye the seasonal changes colours, so let me just magnify that and bring it around to show you. So that's the colour palette that we're working from. Obviously, the screen is different to print, is different to fibre, so there's always bits of variations that going on with these. So I always start off either the very palest or the very darkest and work my way in, because when I put the seasonal changes packs together, I'm always trying to think about, well, how are you likely to use these? And the thing that these packs are great for is doing colour work. And the thing that gives you contrasting colour work is not the colours themselves, it's the different intensities, it's the different tonal values. And for that, you need some colours that visually appear dark and some colours that visually appear light. And it doesn't actually matter what colour on the spectrum they are. They just need to either be dark or they need to be light. And you can then create contrast using no matter what colours you've got. So even though this palette is all shades of brown, there are darks and lights in there. So I'm going to start off with the 2 darkest colours. The lightest colour on this one, I think I'm actually going to leave as just undyed fibre. I did this, might have been February last year. There was a snowdrop one that I just used some undyed fibre, and because sometimes you need a white, and the best way to get white is to use white fibre. And then we've got 2 mid-tones there as well. So I'm going to start off with the darks. This isn't going to be as dark a palette as they sometimes are, so I'm not going to be using massive amounts of dye. Dyeing paler colours can also sometimes be much, much harder than dyeing darker colours, because there's a tendency to want to use too much dye. You need surprisingly little dye to make a pastel colour. And what's it? Vivian has said, pre-mixed dyes, how long would you keep them for before they go off? If you want lots of technical details, Vivi, I have an entire course which is completely devoted to teaching you how to use acid dyes to dye fibre, which has got loads and loads of technical information. But very quickly, basically, you can keep acid dyes without citric acid mixed in them for pretty much forever. I've never had any of them go off. They are not like cellulose dyes where you have to mix them and use them immediately, but you have to not put citric acid in with them. So these are all pre-mixed, and they stay pre-mixed. They don't tend to last long in here because obviously I go through quite big quantities on a regular basis. So these are 2 litre bottles. And it's rare that one of those will last a month. Some of them I'll be replacing every 2 or 3 days if I'm doing a big batch of dyeing that week. So, okay, let's start off with our darkest colour. My phone, oh no, there we go. Right, we've got 2 shades of brown. We've got a greyed brown and a dark brown. So our darkest colours is that one and that one. So those are the ones that I'm going to start off with first. I'm just going to give these jugs a rinse because I've already been dyeing this morning. And when we're working with pale colours in particular, what I don't want to do is contaminate them with, particularly some of them have got like some magenta pink dye in them, and that would really cause massive issues with the colour. So I'm going to start off with the top shade on Hoarfrost, which is the one that I've described it as being chestnut, which is a bit, I'm not entirely sure why I picked chestnut. Oh, I know, I was working from top to bottom to top. The colour order is all out of order. So the one that I've sort of said is a mushroomy colour. So it's kind of brown, it's kind of grey, it's kind of black. So we're going to start off with 25 of this shade of brown. So I actually keep 2 shades of brown in stock because they have very different appearances, and you'll see those when I move on to dyeing the more chestnut shade, because one's very warm toned, one's very cool toned. So that's the one that is the cool toned brown. I think by itself, let's get rid of you because that's dirty. This isn't going to be quite the right colour. So when I'm developing colours that I want specific colours, I just test them out on, you can use filter paper, but kitchen roll works just as well. I just need you. So we're dyeing 100 grams of fibre because I have 100 grams and then split it up to make the packs. So in order to make this have enough dye to spread over the fibre, it does just need a little bit of water in it. And then I just dob it onto the kitchen roll like that. So that's our just dark brown by itself. How do I feel about that? I think what I might do is I might put a tiniest little bit of black into it just to verge it slightly into being a little bit more purple. So I keep all my dyes. When I built the new studio, I came up with a new way of storing these dyes and dispensing them, which works really well for big non-repeatable batches. But for smaller batches like these of 100 grams at a time, where I need less dye and I need precise measurements, the system doesn't work quite so well, but it's the minority of dyeing that I do. So these are all bar optics, and they are set up to dispense 25 millilitres of liquid at a time. So 25 millilitres you can do quite precisely, but if I only want 2 or 3 millilitres of something, then I go back to the system that I used to use, which is using syringes, and they work really nicely for measuring out as little as 1 millilitre of dye. So I am just going to go for 1 millilitre in this. So my black dye is quite purple toned. We'll just give that a quick swirl round and see whether that's made a difference in the tone. So if I hold that there, so you can see that already, just that difference has already made it a little bit darker. And I think I'm happy with that. So it's just shifted the brown into being slightly more purple tone, fractionally darker. So if anybody's watched the previous videos, you'll know that even if I'm saying this is the darkest colour, it's still not going to be anywhere near as dark as some of the colours we've had in previous months, because none of the colours in this palette are particularly dark. So that's a good one. I shall put that to one side. The next one that we are going to dye is going to be the colour that is at the bottom down here. So this is all looking slightly bluer on because you're looking at it on my phone screen, but if you have the original web page up, you'll also be able to see what the original colour palette was. So we're going to go for the chestnut colour at the bottom. The RAF are flying, and that's what that noise in the background is. That's some trainer jets going through the valley. We're going to go for the other shade of brown that I keep. And technically you could fiddle about and use just one of them, but because of the scale of dyeing that I do, I tend to want to be trying to dye as efficiently as possible. So there's certain colours that I keep in pre-mixed shades that sort of wouldn't necessarily be colours that you would keep around if you were going to do dyeing at home, where you might not be wanting to invest in such a wide range of dyes. Right, I've had another 25 of that one, so that is 50. And I refer to it as being a red brown. And if I pop a dot on there, you might be able to see why. So if we can compare it to the mushroomy colour that was using the other shade of brown, you can see how much redder in tone this is. It needs a fraction more red orange colour adding to it. So for that, I'm going to use this one, which is a sort of scarlety orangey one. It's a very, very luminous orange, but I know works very, very well with this particular shade of brown. But again, I don't need an awful lot of it. Let's start off with just one and see where we go, because that's the rule. When you're trying to come up with colours, it's a bit like with adding seasoning to cooking. It's very easy to add more, but once you put it in there, you can't take it away without starting fresh. So just putting 1 millilitre in there hasn't made a massive difference. Let's go for another 2. And I think that will be about right for us. Because I don't want to make it orange. I just want to just alter it fractionally. Wait for it to dry slightly. So I've had 3 so far. I'm going to put another 2 in. We're still not quite warm enough. But I don't probably want to go for an awful lot there. So when these dyes are wet, they always look darker and more intense than they actually are. So those probably on camera don't look massively different. But we've now got to the point where we've got quite a hefty chunk of this reddish brown shade, and we've got 5 millilitres of this really quite vibrant orange that's in there. Let's go back to the photo and have a look. My phone's locked. Fortunately, touchscreens still work with nitrile gloves on them, which is quite helpful. Right. Yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. Particularly as I've brought those forward, it's quite nice having a patch of sunshine. Sort of I can see in person a little bit more of a difference between them. That will also need a little bit of water to go onto it to make sure it goes over 100 grams of fibre, because we've not got massive amounts of dye in there. Right. Next, 2 colours. So as I say, that's our inspiration one. That one I'm going to leave as white fibre, as undyed fibre, because I could take some white fibre and try and spread out the tiniest fraction of brown or yellow or orange on it, but to be quite honest, white fibre is going to work really well. So we've then got our 2 paler shades, both of which are sort of paler colours of the original dark colours that I've mixed. So if this is that darkest mushroomy brown, that one's basically a paler version of it. And if that's our chestnut brown, that's a paler version of it. Now this colour here is paler in terms of tonal value compared to that one. So this is actually going to be our mid-tone. So we've ended up with 2 darks, a very, very light, a slightly paler colour, and then a mid-tone. So I'm going to go to the mid-tone next, which is going to be the one which is based upon the one that we've just mixed, that's like the chestnutty colour. I've described it as tan in the description. The darkest chestnut colour used 50 millilitres of dye. So, but I don't want it, just using half of that isn't going to produce something that's still quite pale enough. So I'm going to go for 10 of the red brown, and we will see where we go from there. So I'll just pull that off, and then just need to measure out a smaller amount. Get rid of the air again. There we go. Right, so that's 10 of that. And the water, I don't measure out anymore, because I instinctively know how much water how much liquid I'm actually going to need. But as you start dyeing, you end up you do need to measure it out. So you can see how comparatively, just that's 50 millilitres of dye compared to 10 millilitres of dye. It's not made it into a really, really pale muted colour. But I think that's about where we want it to be. So when I look at the 2 shades of brown in the original picture, the paler shade of the chestnut, the one that I've described as tan, is slightly more yellow looking compared to the original chestnut, which has got some more orangey reddy tones to it. So I'm happy with that for that one. And then we've got the final one, which I've sort of said is kind of like a beigey colour, but it's, again, it's slightly yellower coloured than the original shade of mushroom. But we're not going to need hardly any dye again at all for that one. Grab another container. So, and all these bits that I pull off, they all eventually get used for lots of different projects. Grab another syringe. Make sure we get one that works. They get worn out eventually. Right, let's go for just 5 of this. Because I do want it to be paler than the red brown that we've just mixed. I said this one was going to be a bit of a head scratcher, mixing up neutrals to do lots of different things. That's not the brown, that's the black. Let me get rid of that. Okay, we'll try that again with the actual brown dye. give that a rinse. Yeah, that's the black dye that I've just pulled off, not the brown. As soon as I put it on there, and I've just looked at it and gone, well, that's not right. So it's that lilac shade that's on there. So this black dye that I use, when you dilute it down quite a lot, you actually end up with something that's a very pale mauve. And all black dyes are either blue toned, green toned, or purple toned. You don't tend to get a pure black dye for fabric. It's basically a very, very dark colour of either blue, purple, or green. So this one I know is purple toned. So that can be quite useful to know, because it will affect when you come to start mixing it in with other colours. Right, that's my brown this time. That's better. So that's more like what we were looking for. So we've got, that was the black, which when diluted out becomes purple. That's actually our pale brown colour, which is a paler version of that one there, just by adding more water to it. I think that needs just a tiny fraction of yellow, just to warm it up ever so slightly, to make sure that it does become different enough to the original dark brown that we mixed. So that was 5 old brown. And then I have 2 yellows. I've got one that's very warm toned, one that's a very cool toned. Which do I want? I think we want the cool toned one. Let's go for that. Right, you've had citric acid in, so let's have a clean syringe. It's not going to need very much of this. So we've got 1 millilitre of the lemon going into there. And that's just shifted the colour slightly. So it's just given us something with just a little bit more variation in it. It's possibly not an entirely matching that original picture. Am I happy with that one? I think I am. Quite often what I do is I'll take that original picture and then I'll just make minor tweaks to some of the colours to create something I think is going to work better on fibre for the purposes I know we're going to use it for. So I've got 4 dyes there, because remember, the palest colour I'm actually going to use, I'm going to leave as cream dyed fibre in the packs. Let's make sure we don't get mixed up with any of those. Give that out of the way. So those are my dyes that I'm using. We are ready with our cling film. So even semi-solids, I dye using a low water method, because I think it gives much better results on fibre. So this went into soak yesterday in just some regular water with just some washing up liquid added. And it's the Cambrian wool, which is the Welsh Mountain Cross with the blue face Leicester. So let's start off with you. Yeah, so some people do immersion dyeing for semi-solid colours, but every time I've tried it, it's so, you have to watch it like a hawk, because as soon as you start getting bubbles, you start getting agitation, and as soon as you start getting agitation, you start to felt the fibre. So I prefer to go for low water methods for all the types of fibre that I dye, because I think it gives you better results. So, and we're fine. Pressing down like that doesn't cause any issues with felting. It's only once you start to rub on fibre that you start to end up with issues with felting happening, particularly because at the moment this is cold. So this has been sat in a soaking bucket So, and of course, cold fibre, the scales are all closed up so we don't get felting. So that's evenly distributed the dye throughout. There'll still be some variation because this isn't commercially dyed, it's hand dyed, but not so much. I think it gives a pleasing effect. And then we've just added the citric acid on because these are acid dyes, which refers to the fact that the dyes need Alexa, stop squeaking. The dyes need slightly acidic conditions in order to make a good bond onto fibre, and that we use citric acid, which is basically, it's lemon juice. It's used in bath bombs. It's a common food additive to give that hint of sour to a lot of tasting things, and it acts as preservative as well. So I'm just squeezing out as much water as I can before we add the dye. So that was the pale mushroom, the beige colour. This is going to be the paler version of the chestnut, I think. Oh no, that's going to be the dark version of the chestnut. They all look much the same in the jugs because they're all just dark liquid. So this is the mushroom dark brown. So I'm just pressing the dye, just trying to distribute it evenly. So, and the nice thing about a low water method as well, particularly in the current energy price crisis, is that because you're not using very much by way of liquid, it doesn't take anywhere near as long to get it to the temperature at which the dyes will form a bond. Because once we put the dyes on, these need heating up in some way. I use a big oven because I'm dyeing lots of fibre, and I can have a dedicated oven. I use oven safe cling foam for that purpose. So that's our dark shade of the brown. So you'll be able to see that they are two different intensities. They've got two different tonal values. This is the dark one, that's the pale one. So that should give us a nice contrast between those two. Okay, that's two more to go. So these will both be the light and the pale, dark, more chestnut browns. So I think this is the dark one. Oh no, the pale one. Two guesses and it would be the wrong one. So you can see how you really don't need very much dye to start making these mid-tone colours. To make pastels, you need surprisingly little. To make truly dark colours, you need a surprisingly large amount. But for the amounts in between, you can sort of increase the dye quite a lot without seeming to have managed to make the fibre actually any darker. And you have to decrease the amount of dye by a huge amount in order to make something that's really, really pale. So, and it's really hard to judge colours wet. because they always look darker than they are once the fibre's dry, because the wet fibre reflects the light far more. So we'll have citric acid again. And I'm now going, did I put citric acid on the dark one? So always the trouble when I don't have to talk along, everything gets done on automatic pilot and I don't have to think about it, because of course I spend most of my working days doing this. But as soon as you have to start talking about what you're doing, all of a sudden your brain forget how to do all the things that it's used to doing automatically. I'm pretty certain I did, but we'll find out when I go to heat set it, because if it's not got the citric acid in, it won't. So this is our last one. I definitely put citric acid on the second one I did. Thank you. It's about those like that when you start to doubt yourself. I mean, worst case scenario, if you're ever not sure, you can just open it up and put more on, because putting more on doesn't hurt. So this is going to be the dark chestnut. The worst thing that I did when I first started doing these live streamings is that I completely forgot to write the recipes down. Which luckily the video was quite helpful, because it meant I could watch it back and go, what did I do? Because I was so busy talking through what I was doing that I forgot to pick up the pen and write any of the information down. So it meant that if without the video I would never have been able to recreate it. I'd have had to have started from scratch. So this is our darkest colour. So this one had the 50 millilitres of dye on it. So Julia said, do you mix your dyes yourself or do you use commercial pre-mixed colours? I buy the dyes in powdered form and I dilute them to my chosen strength myself. All the dyes that I use are what's called, they're pure colours. The dye molecules themselves are the actual colour that they give me. So my brown dye is a brown dye molecule. It's not a mixture of red, yellow and blue dyes. I don't like the dyes which are sold as colours which contain mixtures of shades, because they can tend to behave unpredictably when you come to heat set them, particularly in the low water methods that I use. So I only use dyes which are the colour of dye molecule that they say that they are, if that makes sense. So those are our two browns. They don't look massively different when viewed through the cling film, but this one is hopefully going to end up being much, much darker than this pale one. As ever with these seasonal changes ones, I have done it in the past where I've mixed them in the videos and then heat set them and then washed them and dried them and looked at them and gone, oh, those are not right. They're not going to work. There's not enough contrast. The colours don't work together. I'm not happy with them. And sometimes I'll go back and re-dye them. There was one last summer where I dyed two different yellows because I couldn't decide between a mustard yellow and a golden yellow, and put it in the Fellowship of Yarn and said, what do you think? Which one do you like? Which one do you like best? But hopefully they're going to give us an interesting colour palette, one that's very different to any of the ones we've had before, which is why it's quite nice to keep changing these colour selections, because if you don't like it this month, next month there'll be a colour or selection along that you probably do like. If you do want to know anything more about dyeing fibre in particular, in the link in the description below this is a link to the fibre dyeing course that I put together last summer. It's yours to access forever. It's online based. You can watch it as many times as you like. It's not time limited, but there is a space to leave pictures, ask questions, ask for feedback, make comments, ask for help and guidance if you can't find any particular information. And it talks through sort of a lot of the things that I've briefly touched upon, as in this is how I work, rather than this is a tutorial on how to do things. So it's written in a way where you've got lots of written information and instructions, and a video which is set up to look right over my shoulder so that you can see exactly what I'm doing. I talk you through mixing dyes, I talk you through choosing dye colours, I talk you through analysing the dyes that you have got, because different brands are slightly different colours. I talk you through putting dye on in every single sort of colour application that you can think, different ways of heat setting, lots and lots of technical information which should take you from I don't know anything about dyeing fibre to I can now dye fibre in lots and lots of different ways. But yeah, so this will be heat set now, probably be, depends if I run the dehumidifier tonight, depends on what the weather ends up doing for the rest of the day, if I can justify the electricity costs for it. So it'll be maybe, well, no, tomorrow is the first technically. It might not be ready till Thursday, but this will be going up in the online shop. If you miss out on the first batch, then there will be more to come as well. Hope you've enjoyed this session, and there will be probably one back at the beginning of March with the next set of colour choices. So I'm sure I will see you around on the internet somewhere over the next few weeks. So lovely to see you all. I'm going to crack on. I'm going to busy dyeing stock ready for Wonderwool Wales. Oh, I've got dye on my neck. Looking at the picture going, what's that? What's that blob? It's dye. Yeah, so I'm busy getting stock ready for Wonderwool Wales, because I've got a couple of holidays, bits of time away between then and now. So I want to have lots and lots of fibre ready to take with me to that event as well. So it's all full production going on here at the moment. So enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. So bye.